And now we are live. Hi, everybody on our live streaming platform, and hi, everybody on Facebook. My name is Kristie Arslan, and I am the entrepreneur in residence and a small business owner with the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, or otherwise known as SBE Council. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Small Business Insider Live. This is our live stream program that we do every Thursday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we talk about different issues, policy, research, tools and tips to grow for small business owners. So keep an eye out. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at SBE Council to keep an eye out for our next Small Business Insider Live. Joining me today is Ray Keating. Ray is the chief economist for the SBE Council. He is one of the most prolific experts and writers on all things small business. He writes a number of our reports and research. He also often testifies before Congress on key policy issues that are impacting small business. And also, he happens to be an author of fiction. So thank you, Ray, for joining us. We appreciate you coming here today to talk to us and all of our audience at Small Business Insider Live.
Sure. Hi, everybody, and hi, Kristie. Great to be here.
Great. Well, today we're going to be talking about a new report new index that's released by SBE Council. Every year, SBE Council releases the Small Business Policy Index. And the Small Business Policy Index examines the 50 states, and according to regulations, to the tax climate and other key indicators, determines essentially if the environment is small business friendly or not. And I know, Ray, you're one of the key authors, or you're the key author of this index. And so we're happy to have you here to talk about the 2017 results, which were just released yesterday.
21st annual.
21st annual. So wow, it's been a long time running, which is great to have, great information to have. So before we get into the good stuff, I know everyone wants to know, what are the worst states? What are the best states? Can you talk a little bit about what measures you utilize to come up with the rankings?
Sure. We're up to 55 different measures now. When we started off 21 years ago, I think there were like maybe a dozen. So it gets bigger and hopefully better each year. Just last year we had 50, now we're up to 55, and they split up. Almost half are tax or tax related. So 27 fall into the tax category. There's another 20 that fall into rules and regulations. Another 5 that cover government spending, state and local government spending and debt. And then we've got, I think I got my math right, 3 left that are performance related. How well is government doing some of the bare essential duties that it should be carrying out that certainly impact small businesses? So 55 measures. I've argued that it's the most comprehensive look at the policy climate across the states for small business and entrepreneurship.
Well, that sounds pretty extensive. And I noticed when I was looking at the report, and I'll post up the link for everybody, so if you have some time and want to go look at the full index, you're welcome to do so. But I noticed that, there are quite a number of measures, and I was wondering if you weighted any others more than some of the other measures. For example, you looked at taxes and regulation, but you also looked at things like crime rate or highway cost efficiency. And so did you weight anything more than others?
Well, you can see that obviously it's heavily indexed, heavily weighted towards taxes. Regulations are big, but I think most small business owners would say, okay, yeah, taxes and regulations, those are big issues for us as owners, as entrepreneurs. In terms of how much, kind of figuring out how to measure each, most of them are pretty straightforward, but there's some creativity involved, obviously, in terms of trying to make this all comparable and so that it makes sense, if you will. And unfortunately, sometimes, for example, on the regulatory front, it's not easy to find, just a broad regulatory measure that covers all the states. So this is how we, we're combining it. We're basically creating our own with these 20 different measures. The performance side of government is interesting because people over the years have suggested all sorts of things, but you can't go by, for example, how much money you spend on roads, because you might be spending that money wisely or not spending it so wisely. So that's why we have this one measure by the Reason Foundation that puts out they look at both sides. They look at how the roads are, how they actually function, and the amount of money spent. So, and we also have an education measure from ALEC that looks at what kind of reform measures, positive reform measures, have gone on in the states on the education front. And these are things, obviously, that business owners are concerned about because, highways, transportation, and they want an educated workforce. And then crime, obviously, is in there because that's really the first duty of government, that, if you're not protecting life, limb, and property and protecting small businesses and their stores, then there's a major problem in terms of being able to invest and create the jobs that we want small businesses to create and so on. So it's very weighted. Yeah, a lot of tax measures, a lot of regulatory measures, but we try to get these other things in as well. And I'll say to those watching us, I love suggestions because, as I said, this has gotten bigger and better each year. So if you've got some ideas, certainly let us know.
Great. So now let's get to the good stuff. What, based on the rankings, which states came out most favorable to small business, and what characteristics push them to the top?
Yeah, the top states, Nevada's #1, Texas is #2 this year, South Dakota #3, Wyoming. Actually, it's interesting to note the top 6. Wyoming's #4, Florida #5, and the state of Washington is #6. Now, 5 of those states impose no income taxes whatsoever. So they don't have taxes on individuals, income taxes on individuals. They don't have capital gains taxes. They don't have income taxes on corporations. That's a huge competitive advantage. Yeah. They also don't have death taxes. So these are big pluses that put them, right up at the top of the list. Florida is the only one in that mix that they don't have a personal income tax, but they have a corporate income tax. But that's the big advantage for those states, and a whole host of other ones. I mean, again, there are 55 measures, but so they're overwhelmingly positive. There are certainly some negatives in the mix for those states that they still have to deal with. Nobody's perfect. They can always improve, but those states have done the best in terms of providing a solid policy climate for entrepreneurs and small businesses. And there are some states that are moving in the right direction, that have implemented some changes in recent years or just in the midst of doing it now. For example, there are some Midwestern states that rank very well on our index. Indiana is, testing myself, Indiana's #7, Ohio's #10, Michigan's #12. Those are all, they used to be considered Rust Belt states, but over the last couple of years, even going back farther, I could say with Ohio, for example, going back almost 10 years, they've really put in an effort to make their policy climate much more receptive for entrepreneurs and for investors and for small businesses. So there are states moving in the right direction, and those ones at the top really do excel in terms of those income tax issues, for example.
And I'm not sure if you know this off the top of your head, but those top states, has there been, because they're making such an effort to improve their climate for small businesses, or have already improved their climate for small business and entrepreneurship, have we seen a growth of businesses being started in those states? Yeah,
what's interesting is each year we try to do, obviously, some sort of analysis. Why are we doing this? Does it make any sense? So the study includes actually kind of a literature review on why most of these are in there, and what's the impact, for example, of income taxes and regulations and so on businesses and on economic growth and so on. So we kind of back it all up with that, but then we do our own analysis on a few key issues that kind of lend itself to doing this type of this type of examination. But when you compare what we did is compare the top 25 on the index versus the bottom 25. And what we find is a significant difference in economic growth overall on average. There's always an exception, here or there. But on average, economic growth is much faster in the top 25 states versus the bottom. Population growth, much faster. And this is all laid out in the study. People can take a look at it compared to the bottom 25. And then my favorite is something called net domestic migration. What is that? It's just the movement between the states. So you factor out international immigration, births and deaths, and you find out, gee, where are people moving? They're moving with their feet. And the top 25 are importers, if you will, of people. People go there overwhelmingly compared to the bottom 25. In fact, the bottom 25 have some of the what I call some of those states are the biggest exporters of people. The other side of the story is obviously who's at the bottom. And when you look at the bottom three, California, New Jersey, and New York, those are the bottom three. And they're among the biggest exporters of people to other states. We shouldn't be surprised by any of that in terms of where they are and in terms of their costs that they impose. And at that end, the problem is there's no simple solution. Because when you're at the bottom, you do a lot of things wrong. So it's not a simple, like, what can we do in this one area to really make a big difference? You have to start that way. You have to start chipping away at it. But, California, in terms of it has the highest, for example, personal income tax rate in the country. And unfortunately, voters just voted to extend that. New York, I, for some reason, live in New York. And they, they do everything bad. I mean, unfortunately, you have some states, for example, that, maybe they don't have an income tax but maybe another tax is on the high side or something. But New York has achieved this unfortunate goal of having all of their taxes essentially rank very poorly on the index. So these states really have to work hard to get, they have to turn in a completely different direction to get this policy climate straight. And it's not a coincidence that they're exporting people to other states.
Well, it sounds like, obviously, for the states that are struggling and also the states that are doing great, it seems like two key factors. One, they're creating a favorable environment for both people to come to the state and start businesses to the state, whereas those who are at the bottom of the index have a climate that is pushing people out because of the lack of opportunity and probably lack of economic opportunity, the high cost of living there due to taxes. And, obviously, if you can't afford to live there or you're not having the economic opportunity there, you tend to go somewhere else. So
that's a big part of it, because you have to look not just at the costs directly for the business, but for example, what are the costs for the employees? Are they going to be able to afford to live there? So can the business get access to the people that they need to really excel? So that's a big question. And I always point out with the index, this is focused on policy issues, policy decisions. There are obviously a whole host of other reasons or factors that come into decisions in life. Again, I live in New York. We had a story a number of years ago in one of the Hawaii newspapers. Hawaii ranks poorly on our index. They have very high policy costs. But they interviewed a few people, business owners, who responded by saying, "Yeah, absolutely, this is dead on correct. This tax, these regulations, blah blah blah, a real problem." But one guy said, he goes, "Yeah, but when it becomes a little overwhelming, I just close up and I go surfing." So there are other things that come into play. But what we're trying to get at, is it a plus or a minus? Are policy decisions by state and local elected officials, is that a plus in the equation or a minus? And it does matter. When you look at the numbers, it does matter.
Well, what could policymakers do? I mean, obviously, SB Council will highlight this index to policymakers out there, but anything you can point out to policymakers they should be aware of to help, improve their standing, and what can they do to make their climate in their state more favorable to small business?
Yeah, over the years, we've talked to a whole host of state officials, elected officials, and in their economic development offices and so on. And we've gone over, for example, we spoke to somebody from Louisiana once, and I testified in Georgia and so on. So we go over what the situation is in each state and try to see, where are the big weaknesses that they can work at. And there are examples. I mentioned a few states that have made some positive changes. They can look at what's going on in other states. One of the big stories over the last few years is North Carolina. North Carolina has gone through a major tax reform effort on the personal income tax side and on the corporate income tax side. And, North Carolina always used to rank very, very poorly. And now they're in the top 25. So, and they're in the midst of, there are more corporate income tax reductions coming. So that's a great example for other states to look at to see the dramatic change there. Another state is actually New Mexico. This goes back a while. They made some dramatic changes in terms of capital gains taxes, personal income taxes, and then more recently, they're also in the midst of reducing their corporate income tax. So things like that. On the regulatory front, I just noticed we missed it with this index, but I think it was yesterday. Missouri just signed a right to work law. So they become, I believe, the 28th state that's a right to work state. So we include that in our measure, and that's certainly a plus for Missouri and will be reflected next year. So you've got to, again, it's kind of a, for the folks that are serious about it, it's really interesting because you get to sit down with them and you go across all these measures and you kind of talk about how they can make some changes, and you offer the examples from other states. So but they've got to be serious about it. And, when you look at states like California, I mean, I wrote a piece that's on our website now about California, and my simple question was, why is California waging a policy war against entrepreneurs and small businesses? Mm-hmm. That's not hyperbole. When you look at where they rank, they're not only dead last, but they're dead last by a good distance,
Which is interesting considering particular areas of San Francisco, like the San Francisco, the Silicon Valley area, are considered, supposedly hotbeds of.
And that goes to the other issue, like that whole idea of what's the management term? It just went out of my head. Shame on me. I teach management classes, but certain businesses grouping together to take advantage of the talent and so on and so on. So those are all things that certainly for Silicon Valley has been a big positive. But think about what, I always think about what Silicon Valley and other parts of California. I've only been in California a couple times. It's a beautiful state from what I've seen. Has so much going for it. Imagine if it wasn't, again, waging a policy war against small businesses, where it would be in terms of economic growth and job creation. So they've got to, again, readjust and look at a different way of doing things.
Well, great. Well, we want to take a few questions. Again, I'm going to post up for everybody, pin up the link to the SB Council Small Business Policy Index, our 2017 version, which was released, so that if you want to click on it at some point and take a look at your state or learn more about the measures that SB Councils use to come up with the rankings, you can. So, Ray, we have a few questions that have come in, and if anybody wants to ask a question, you can write it in our question box here if you're on our platform, or write it in the comments section on Facebook and share it with us, and I'll ask Ray your question. We have the first question from Steve at IBAW. He mentions that he noticed that Illinois is ranked number 29, but its debt for unfunded pension liabilities has exceeded 130 billion. Why doesn't this impact their rating?
Yeah, Illinois is a very interesting state. They actually improved a little bit because they had a temporary tax that was in effect. So they were actually ranked worse in recent years, but I think it was last year that was phased out. But anyway, specifically on this question, we do have a debt measure in there, and Illinois ranks very poorly. I believe they're the 5th worst in terms of state and local government debt. So we cover it partially, but that's one of those things where I'm glad the unfunded pension idea came up, because that's one of those things where I have to put it in a file and think about, does that make sense to add to the index going forward? And thanks for that. How about that? But we do cover it on the debt measure to a certain extent.
Sure. And then we have another question. How can small business owners and their local and state groups use the index to improve their state's business climate? What are some of the key messages that they should take away and maybe use to help advocate for change?
Yeah, it should be easier for small business owners, right? Because both sides of the political aisle always say, we love small businesses. Yes, businesses are great. So now it's hopefully when small business owners engage with the elected officials, if you're in one of those states that rank poorly, you can point out, listen, that's great that you love us, but could you look at some measures that would actually improve the policy climate for us? And I think it's always a challenge for small business owners, right, to find time to do these things. That's why we exist, the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, and why various state groups, small business groups exist. So hopefully they can use this to make their point. But, quite frankly, the point is, hammer away. You recognize the importance of small business. Small business is a huge source of economic growth. It's the source of new jobs. So if you're serious about all these things, then, let's get together and start improving the climate for small business in our state.
Mhm. No, I mean, but as a small business owner myself, I think it's critically important to stay engaged with what's going on in your state and what kind of policies coming down the pike, so that you can prepare. You can prepare for what may change, so that you're not impacted or surprised in your small business. As you know, small businesses don't have the legal teams or the accountants or departments that can help them figure everything out or implement things. So, we have to think on the fly or act on the fly. But I can tell you from personal experience, just by getting involved and contacting policymakers and talking to them about things that are going to impact my business or what could be done that could help my business, I've seen actual change. And so I think it's important for small businesses to work with groups like SB Council, which can help you meet your members, or work with local small business groups to help you stay engaged and actually share your story.
And your experience is a great example, because whenever I speak to small business owners, I make the point that you can't take this the wrong way, but small business owners have more clout going in the door. Mm-hmm. They're elected officials, or if they pick up the phone or send an email or whatever, just because of who they are. They own a business. They're employing people in your district, in your state. So if you make the effort to contact them and make your point clear on some key issues, it's going to carry more weight than, quite frankly, the average Joe or Jane touching base. And I would urge the average Joe and Jane, if you will, to do it as well. But small business owners have to realize that they do have the ability, the clout to make some difference.
Sure. I mean, we're job creators. Most of the new jobs are created through small business. And in this economy in particular, with high unemployment rates, the one thing that members of Congress and local and state policymakers want to see is jobs. So I agree with you completely. As a business owner, you can have more ability to get your phone call returned or get that meeting scheduled with your member, so they can hear you out about the issues that are impacting your business.
Yep.
I have one more question for you, Ray, if you have some time. What is your outlook for the economy this year, and what can small businesses expect in 2017? We've heard a lot on the news that small business confidence is on the rise, but what policies do you think are coming down the pike? Will it meet their expectations?
Yeah, good question. I've turned the corner, Kristie, because for the past since 2007, I've depressed myself when I talk about the numbers are the numbers, and I've just been down in the dumps now for almost a decade. So you saw the change in small business confidence, I think, right after the election. Now the question is, what happens on the policy front, and do we get some real positive changes? Because I really do think that this poor recovery that we've had for so long, since the middle of 2009, really has been a policy problem. So in terms of what we're hearing from Washington on tax reform, these are things we need to be doing. I would argue tax relief and tax reform. We need regulatory relief and regulatory reform. And those are two big issues that certainly small business owners are concerned about. And we're seeing positive movement on that. So that's a huge plus. And if we see, really, we've seen some good action on the regulatory front. But if we see real big, significant change in those two areas in a pro-growth direction, I think that's going to be good news for the economy going forward. There's always uncertainty. There's uncertainty about trade. That's an issue that's gotten really murky. So we've got to see what happens there. We don't want to see obstacles put up in terms of being able to, sell your goods internationally and buy goods internationally. So that's a question mark. But on the other issues, on those other two issues, and on government spending, we've seen some talk about, some restraint on that front as well. So if that government spending restraint comes in and real tax and regulatory relief and reform happen, I think it's going to be good news for the economy.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Ray, for your time. We appreciate you talking to us about the 2017 Small Business Index. Again, I encourage everybody to please visit sbecouncil.org. You could take a look at the index and some of the other reports that Ray has written about the economy and other key issues impacting small business. I also recommend that you follow us at SBE Council on Twitter, and also you can find us on Facebook. And if you have any further questions, feel free to post a question on Facebook, and we'll have Ray get back to you with an answer.
Well,
thanks so much, Ray, for your time.
Thanks, Kristie. Good seeing you.
Have a good day, and be careful out there in that blizzard in New York right now.
I've got my tropical tie on at least, so there you go.
Thanks so much, everybody.